the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to have with me E.J. Wenstrom. E.J., could you give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you write?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm E.J. Wenstrom. I write science fiction and fantasy with a little bit of a darker edge for both adults and teens. I like difficult characters. I like monsters. I love a good trope. And that's what I'm all about.
E.J., I know from past experience that you were the big winner for the Royal Palm Literary Award. Can you tell me about that journey?
Yes, thank you. It was actually a very interesting journey, a very unexpected thing to happen. The book in question was Mud, the first book in my Chronicles of the Third Realm War series. And the first book I wrote and had published. It took me 5 years to write. So along the way of writing this book, I also was shaping all of my writerly habits. I learned to write every single day, which is not necessarily for everyone, but it's definitely very important for me. I learned to wake up and write before I did anything else in my day because I was too tired at night after having my entire work day and everything else happen. So I started fresh, and that was the first thing I did. I, had my first beta readers. I had my first agent queries, everything else. And along the way, I got very, very lucky after a bit of an up and down querying process with agents and everything else. I kind of took on a whim and entered one of those Twitter pitching contests. And I have to tell you, I don't even remember which one it was. But through that, got connected to a wonderful small press that was just starting out, City Owl Press, and an incredible editor who I just adore, Heather McCorkle. And I just worked so wonderfully with them throughout that journey. And I have to give a lot of the credit to them to make that book something that was worthy of consideration for something on that level. But yeah, it was incredible and unexpected. And I have to tell you, I didn't even realize when I entered the Royal Palm Literary Awards that year, this is how much of a newbie I was, that there was an overall award in addition to the genre categories. So after we got through the genre categories for speculative, I was like ready to just call it a night. I was tired and we were like ready to go. And my husband was like, just stick around. Like, just don't be that person. And I was like, you're right. And boy, it certainly was the right call. It was the right call anyway. But it blew me away then, and it continues to blow me away. It was incredible and just a really great honor. And very inspiring as well to be among the other authors who have been recognized with that, and to be part of this community in general. It's the Florida writers community I've continued to be very close with, even after we were brought back to DC a few years later, because it's just such an incredible writers community. And I come back every year for the conference. I just love this group of writers.
Well, I love this group of writers too. So you're not going to get an argument from me. What have you been working on now?
Yes. So I am wrapping up a project and then also trying to push my way through another project to the end. As we speak right now, I am about to launch a book that when this releases, it will have just released. On August 10th, I've got a young adult dystopian novel releasing called Departures. And I'm very excited about this. This is another one of those books that's been a real journey. It's kind of finished up this book at the wrong time for dystopian. It wrapped up in 2017 and went out on query. And I heard a lot of really encouraging rejections where just no one really knew what to do with dystopian at the time, because no one wanted to hear about dystopia when so many people felt like we were living it. Everyone wanted to hear fantasy and other types of escapism during those years. And it did eventually find some representation. We went out on submission, heard a lot more of the same sort of thing where people just weren't picking up dystopian. And we tried that for a couple of years, and eventually we parted ways. It just wasn't quite right fit, but then I went back out on submission. And, sometimes you just have to stick with it for a while. And I think it also was really useful that I kept putting my manuscript in front of additional people, kept taking feedback, kept getting beta readers, and kept revising. So even after it went out on submission, I revised it again. Even after I parted ways with my agent, I revised again. Got some very generous feedback from a couple of agents at small presses while I was out on sub, and revised again. And finally found a home with it with Darkstroke Press. And so very excited to have this finally coming out. It is a novel about two sisters in a dystopian world. One of them is actually scheduled to die at age 17. This is a world where everything is completely monitored, very carefully scheduled. Everything is very carefully arranged to avoid pain and optimize everything to the utmost degree. But what that has arranged is also a lot of controls within this world. And so, of course, everything goes terribly wrong. She does not die, since she's one of the core characters, and she kind of gets slipped out the side door by these rebels on the outside. And so from these two sisters, one on the inside and one on the outside, you start to peel away the layers of this very controlling force of this government. And it starts to ask some questions about what happens when someone has that much control.
That sounds quite like an incredible story, a great journey. And I love how you described it, of the peeling back of the layers of the story. And, we always think about a novel's like an onion and, you peel it back. But the way you described it, it's so much more than that. And that's what novels are, right? They're much more than an onion.
Yes. And it's hard to talk about them sometimes as a result, because, there's that dystopian aspect of this, but then my heart's in a lot of different places with this book, because there's the sibling dynamic in play, which is also very close to my heart as one of three siblings. And then another part of this book too that's very close to my heart is there's some neurodiversity in this book. One of the two primary characters has ADHD, and that's actually why she's, sorry guys, spoiler alert if anyone was about to pick up Departures, but she has ADHD, and that's actually why she was flagged for an early departure. And I have ADHD too. And so a lot of what she goes through as she identifies that this was what she was tagged for and what that really means is informed by my own diagnosis when I was a teenager and all of that. And you can see a lot of her symptoms of ADHD on the page. But there's not a huge amount of ADHD representation, especially for girls, that you see in fiction. And when you do, it's usually in a way where it's trying to help kids like specifically come to terms with the diagnosis, which is incredibly important. But it's not the same as seeing these characters in a way that's multidimensional and just kind of part of a broader story and mix, the way that you do in, say, one very good, well-known example of this is Rick Vorden's series with Percy Jackson. Yes.
I love Percy Jackson. My kids were young when it came out, and I was still doing the nightly reading with them. And so I loved being able to read that series.
Oh, it's so good. And it's so like cute and creative and adventurous, but also, the thing that just made my heart burst was, these kids, they all have learning disorders, and that's part of what signify, it's very tightly tied to their connection to the gods. And it wasn't just a learning disorder that they had. It also was very intertwined with their actual superpowers. It was something that was made them like strong. And I just love that.
EJ, what was it like to break free from your previous series and now you're on to something new?
It was so hard. It was so hard. Because you live in those worlds that you've created, and you kind of build it up around yourself in your head in a way, because, with each book you put into a series, it becomes more complex. You kind of dig yourself deeper into it, and you almost have to immerse yourself in it fully to keep your head in all of the intricacies and the details that are so important to make sure that things are consistent and true to the spirit and everything else that you need to within a series, especially with speculative series. But you become so enveloped in it that, at least for me, it was also very hard to remove myself from it, even though I felt like I was very ready for something fresh. So it took me a little while, and I had to just kind of sit down and work with the page and kind of go through the motions of it for a while before I really found the rhythm of something new. And so it wasn't until maybe the second or third draft really where I really felt that I had those voices down for something fresh, and even more for the world building. But that's always the case for me. World building is just hard.
Well, let's talk a little bit about world building. What recommendations do you have for somebody who's thinking about creating a world? I mean, I realize that even I'm a nonfiction writer, I still have to build a world, and I have to build that layer of place, that sense of place, so that people can identify with it. And when it's on the page, it's never exactly the way it is in real life. I could describe New York City, and my description is going to be very different than yours. What I see, and I'm going to totally interrupt right now, but thinking about this, I was talking to my sister, and we're working on a project together, and we were talking about the house we grew up in. And on paper, it's kind of a small house, but I was really little when I grew up there, and it was huge. And in my head, it's still huge. Like, the living room had like 16-foot ceilings. In reality, they were probably about 10 feet. But I still see them in my head as 16 feet. And that would be the world I would describe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that really gets at the heart of it right there. When you're world building, you're also character building. If you're not really getting into what that world means for your character as well, then you're missing a huge element of what is going to make that world come alive for your reader. So I'm always trying to think about, there's different layers of all of this. So there's what your world is objectively, and there's certain things that have to exist. So there's government, there's the actual concrete rules, there's the materials that exist that the buildings are made out of, the colors, all of that sort of thing. But then there is your character and how your character feels about those rules. Are these things that help them survive? Are they things that help them fit in? Are they things that make it so that they can barely get by? I always think of V.E. Schwab, and she talks about how she likes to write characters who are outsiders. But before she can know what makes a character an outsider, she has to know what makes an insider. And so she always starts by creating that world and what that insider has to look like. And then she builds out from there. And so it's harder for me to work that way. I start with the character, and then I build out from there about, if a character is feeling this way, why do they feel that way? And then start to build the world around that person to be kind of informed by those feelings and attitudes. So it's a little bit inverse, and it takes longer. And it's usually not until later drafts that I have a full sense of what that detailed world is. But it comes together over time. I do it in layers. And then I think another thing that I'm always trying to remind myself of with world building, that is where I start to really feel like it's coming together in feeling alive, is to bring all of the senses into it. So it's not just what you're seeing, but how does something feel? How does it smell? What sounds are in play within a world, and why? And that to me makes something really multidimensional.
you're building in layers. Is each layer with each edit? So you have your first draft, that's just real rough. You go back in and then you start adding concrete, for better lack of a better word, but the actual building structures and what they're made out of. And then you add the colors and then you add the smells, or is all that sort of blending in at the same time?
Well, it's a lot messier than that. So the other thing that I'm like in the process of drafting right now, it's like halfway through the process, is this witchy thriller type of a thing. And so I am just getting to that tipping point where I think that the world is starting to really fill out. And so it flips back and forth between their adult world and their school years. And so I'm getting to that point where I know what courses they took what year, for example. And I'm getting to a point where I know, like, for a long time, I didn't think that they were going to use like wands, like they do in Harry Potter, and a lot of other witching things. And I was going to have them do, like, if you've seen the magicians, they have these really cool little like hand gestures that they use for different spells. And I was thinking it's probably going to be more like that. But as I started getting into it more, I started to realize that there were certain plot devices that would make having wands really handy. And so I just baked it right in there. And so now wands are something that can help you conduct more power. And so it's something that's really useful for beginners usually, because you don't really have control of power yet. But also, if you're really power hungry and you're trying to just grab as much power as you can, then a wand can help you with that too. And so it's something that comes into play a few different times in different uses, but it's still consistent within the world because I was able to pull it in a way that it suited the plot. You can dig yourself into holes doing it that way, but going back to the ADHD, I don't know. I think my brain is a place that is comfortable with messes, and I figure it out eventually and iron out the creases. And if I don't figure it out, a beta reader does, and it works itself out in the end. But that is why, the beta readers, the editors are all so, so, so important.
How many editing processes, and I'm not talking your own personal editing processes, would you suggest somebody use? So you send it out to a beta reader and then you send it out to a second beta reader, or do you send it out to an editor?
Everyone's different. What I like to do is when I get a manuscript to a point where I can no longer find anything that I know needs to be fixed, I will send it to, if I can find them, about 10 beta readers at once. And I do it this way because that way I can really easily distinguish between what is one person's personal taste and what is a real problem within the manuscript. If multiple people are all flagging one piece as I don't get this, or something seems wrong here, or if they're all suggesting different things for the same section, something's wrong there. And maybe I need to figure out my own way of what is the right way to work it out, but something needs to happen. If one person says that one thing is way off and it's not working for them and it's a disaster and I need to cut the whole thing and I'm heartbroken, but no one else says a word about it, I'm probably fine. So it gives me a really good point of reference that it just sheds a little perspective, and I don't have to let one or two people's tastes, even if there's someone I really trust, be the end all be all.
Well, EJ, how can people get in touch with you? How can they find out about your new release?
Yeah. So you can find me online at ejwenstrom.com, or you can find me at Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at EJ Wenstrom.
Perfect. Are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Okay, I'm ready. Let's do it.
If peanut butter wasn't called peanut butter, what would it be called?
Oh, peanut crack.
Peanut crack. I think I'd be that way. I can approve of that one. I can just take the jar and just, keep. I buy it, to be used for things, but I just eat it straight out of the jar.
I can't keep it in the house. I never used to think about it at all, but then we switched to, we've been eating Whole30, which is kind of like paleo, right? So no peanuts is the important thing. And ever since we started eating this way, as just like our general day to day, like if I go out to a restaurant, I'll eat what I want. Peanut butter has more and more just been like candy. Like it doesn't even have to have sugar in it. It's just, it's just the best.
Yeah, that's why I switched to almond butter because it's supposed to be better. But
yeah, you know what almond butter is? Not the best.
I do like peanut butter better. I will say that. Yeah. But a spoonful of almond butter feels healthier. Anyway, my next question: what movie would be greatly improved if it was made into a musical?
Oh, hold on. I take this very seriously. This is not rapid at all. Lord of the Rings.
That is one I would like to see.
That movie was very slow. I like the story, but come on.
What would be the best? What would be the best buy one, get one free of all time?
Peanut butter.
E.J. Wenstrom, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. Boom. I like the peanut butter. That's awesome.
Those rapid responses are always hard. They're fun, though. They're a lot of fun.
All right. EJ, thank you so much.
Thank you.
E.J. Wenstrom believes in complicated heroes, horrifying monsters, purple hair dye, and standing to the right on escalators so that the left side can walk. She writes dark speculative fiction for adults and teens and was the Royal Palm Literary Award Book of the Year with the book titled Mud, the first novel in her Chronicles of the Third Realm War series, and the young adult dystopian novel Departures. When she isn't writing fiction, E.J. Wenstrom is a regular contributor to the DIY, MFA, and BookRiot, and she hosts the FANTASY+GIRL Podcast. Learn, network, and grow at the 20th Annual Florida Writers Conference, October 14th through 17th, 2021. The Florida Writers Youth Conference, October 16th, 2021. Make your mark. Experience the synergy and supercharge your writing career at the 20th Annual Florida Writers Conference. Until next time.